Okay, yeah, let's see. Good. Okay, we're going to be in John chapter 21 this evening. This is the final chapter of John's Gospel. This is the outline that we've been following of this final section, going from chapter 20 with the empty tomb and the resurrection appearances of Jesus, first to Mary Magdalene and then to his disciples on the first day of the week. And then a week later to his disciples when Thomas was present. And then at the end of chapter 20, we were given the purpose for the writing of this gospel. John had written that Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. And that appears to be the sort of end of the gospel, but it doesn't end there, because there's another chapter to come, chapter 21. So although the end of chapter 20 seems a sort of natural conclusion, John still has a bit more to add here in chapter 21, which sort of forms an appendix or an epilogue to the whole gospel here. So we'll see here that Jesus makes another appearance that John records, this time to his disciples when they're at the Sea of Galilee, and then a conversation that Jesus has with Peter on that occasion, and then a final confirmation of the truth of this gospel in the closing verses of the chapter. So we'll read here John chapter 21, verses 1 to 14. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, have you no fish? You have no fish, have you? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net to the right side of the boat and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you've just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. The previous appearances that John has recorded in chapter 20 had all occurred in Jerusalem, but now the scene changes to Galilee, and it's sometime later. John is rather unspecific or vague at the beginning of chapter 21. He just says, after these things. So after the things recorded in chapter 20, then these things happen, but he doesn't give us any time reference there more specific than that. Jesus had said that he would see his disciples in Galilee in Matthew chapter 28 and verse 7. The angel had announced to the women at the tomb that they were to tell his disciples that Jesus would see them in Galilee. The angel invited the women to see the place where he lay, and then said, "Go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him." And then in verse 10 as well, when Jesus meets the women there, he says to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." And then in verse 16 of Matthew chapter 28, we have this: "Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them." So Jesus had informed the disciples that he would see them in Galilee. Matthew mentions them going to a mountain there in Galilee, but here the events in John chapter 21 take place at the sea. And John speaks of Jesus' appearance here as a revelation or showing himself. Revised Standard Version has Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples. And the location of this appearance is the Sea of Tiberias. Tiberias is one of the alternative names for the Sea of Galilee. And those present on this occasion are listed, their names are listed. So we have Simon Peter, we have Thomas, called the twin, who we've already seen in chapter 20, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee. The last time we met Nathanael was way back in chapter 1 of the Gospel, but he's mentioned here as well, and that he came from Cana in Galilee. And then the sons of Zebedee, that would be James and John, and then 2 other disciples who are unnamed. So there were 7 disciples who were present on this occasion. It was Simon Peter then who declared to them his intention to go fishing, and the others decided to accompany him. "I'm going fishing," he says, and they respond, "We will go with you." The decision to go fishing after they've been following Jesus for so many years, and Jesus had called them away from their work as fishermen and told them that they would become fishers of men. So the going back to their fishing now would perhaps indicate a bit of uncertainty amongst the disciples about what they were supposed to do now that Jesus was no longer with them. And although at an earlier appearance there in chapter 20, Jesus had told them that he was sending them on a mission, as of yet they don't really know what that mission is to be. And it's only after the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 that they understand what that mission will be, and they begin to work then with a sense of purpose. So the decision to go fishing seems to be a sort of temporary measure, something to occupy themselves in while they're figuring out what it is they're meant to be doing. But the fishing trip is unsuccessful. We're told here that they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So it's nighttime fishing, which was usually the time when they would go out in the fishing boats to try and catch fish, but not successful on this night. It was at daybreak then that Jesus then appeared to them on the beach. How he arrived there, John doesn't tell us. And the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. They perhaps just saw this figure there on the beach. So as with Mary, the case of Mary Magdalene and the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, Jesus' identity is initially kept from them. They don't recognize him. But the boat is close enough to the shore for Jesus and the disciples to be able to call out to each other. And Jesus asks them, "Children, have you any fish?" And the phrasing of the question is in such a way that it expects a negative answer. You haven't any fish, have you? Is what he's asking. The New Revised Standard puts it like that: "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And the disciples' answer is brief: "No, we don't have any fish, haven't caught anything." So Jesus now instructs them to cast their net onto the right side of the boat, and he says, "And you will find some." They still don't know that it's Jesus there, but the disciples obey his instruction without any question. since they don't know that it was Jesus talking to them, it may have been that they supposed that this person had a better view of the location of the fish than they did. When they cast their net onto the right side, John tells us that they were not able to haul it in for the quantity of fish. So many fish that they couldn't haul it in. And there is a similarity between this incident and the one that is recorded by Luke in chapter 5, verses 1 to 11, right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry and his calling of these men to leave their work as fishermen. On that occasion, it was Peter who had fallen down before Jesus and said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." And perhaps it was this miracle that seems to be repeated here that was sufficient to convince the disciple whom Jesus loved that this person on the beach was Jesus. And so he said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Perhaps the event there reminded him of that earlier incident that had happened. Well, on hearing this, Peter then put on his clothes and he leapt into the sea. He'd been stripped for work, not that he was completely naked, but probably means that he was stripped to the waist. So he then puts on his outer garment so that he can then go and meet Jesus properly dressed. So Peter is anxious to be the first one to get to Jesus. And so he jumps out of the boat, like on the other occasion when it was Peter who stepped out of the boat to walk to Jesus when Jesus was walking on the water. But this time he leaps out of the boat in his hurry to get there to greet Jesus. Meanwhile, the other disciples in the boat are dragging this net that is full of fish to the shore. And John says that they weren't very far off from the land. They were about 100 yards off. Literally, the text says they were 200 cubits away. 200 cubits translates into our distance as being about 100 yards away. And when they came to land then, they saw there a charcoal fire with fish lying on it and bread. So breakfast has been prepared for them. And Jesus then instructs them to bring some of the fish that they've just caught. And again, it's Peter who jumps in here. It's Peter who goes back to the boat and begins to haul this net ashore full of these fish. And John tells us that it was full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many fish, the net was not broken. And these details that are mentioned here, the number of the fish and the net not being broken, indicate that this is the evidence of an eyewitness, details that would have been noticed by someone who had been present there. Jesus now invited the disciples to have breakfast with him, and John mentions here that none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" He says they knew it was the Lord. It seems that the disciples didn't help themselves to the food, but rather Jesus was the one who served them himself. He was the one who gave them the bread and the fish. So he's once again in that role as a servant, as he had washed their feet on that last night. Here he is again serving his own disciples. And this part of the incident is concluded here with John telling us that this was the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after his resurrection. The previous two occasions were the ones that John had recorded in chapter 20, the appearance to the disciples when they were in the locked house on the evening of that first day of the week, Thomas being absent, and then a week later the appearance to the disciples again in the house, this time with Thomas being present. So those would be the two previous occasions, and now this is the third occasion. It's not, of course, the total number of times that Jesus appeared. John's not including the appearance to Mary Magdalene and the other appearances that Jesus made as well, but the ones that he has recorded to the disciples are three here. Okay, we'll read on here in verse 15 down to verse 23. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to them, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" So the final incident that John records here is this conversation between Jesus and Peter. And the incident really has to be taken in conjunction with Peter's denial. 3 times Peter had denied knowing Jesus. "I don't know this man." And now he's given the opportunity to confirm his love for Jesus 3 times. What Jesus says to Peter here really amounts to his restoration, that although Peter had failed by denying Jesus, Jesus still has an important task for Peter to do in providing leadership amongst Jesus' flock. So after they have finished eating their breakfast, Jesus asks Peter the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" What's he talking about here? What are these that he's mentioning? There are several ways in which we might understand Jesus' question. Is he asking, "Do you love me more than these men love me?" A comparison between Peter's love for Jesus and the love that the other disciples have for Jesus. Or, "Do you love me more than you love these men?" So comparison between Peter's love for Jesus and his love for his fellow disciples. Or is it, "Do you love me more than you love these things?" Referring to perhaps to his fishing nets and his fishing boat, symbolizing that old way of life. So does Peter love his old way of life as a fisherman more than he loves Jesus? So several ways in which we might understand that question, more than these. Do you love me more than these? But Peter's reply here is, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." But Peter appeals to Jesus' knowledge of himself. "You know that I love you. You know me. You know that I love you." Peter's reply that John records here uses a different word for love to the one that Jesus had used in his question. Jesus had used the word, the verb, it's a verb, agapeo, but in reply, Peter uses a different word. He uses the word phileo. And some see significance in this and say that Jesus is referring to a higher form of love, that agape love, which Peter is not prepared to admit to. So he uses the word which signifies a lower form of love, an affection, more, I like you more than I love you. Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter said, well, I like you. Perhaps that's how perhaps some read it. So in this way, Jesus is asking Peter if he has this profound love for him, whilst Peter's reply is saying, well, I'm fond of you. I like you. But others take the opposite view of this and say that when Jesus uses agapeo, it's a more distant type of love, an impersonal love. Whereas in his reply, Peter is saying that he has a warm affection for Jesus, a friendship type of love. And then a third view, which is expressed, is that within this context, there's really no difference in meaning in the words for love that John uses in the question and in the reply that Peter gives. That it's just a variation in the wording. It really is of no great significance. And in support of that view is the likelihood that Jesus and Peter spoke to each other in the Aramaic language, which John has translated into Greek in his writing. So the choice of those words is actually John's, rather in the translation, rather than the original words that Jesus and Peter would have used. But what Peter is concerned about is that his love for Jesus is being called into question, and he seeks to affirm that love that he has for Jesus. That's the important point to get from this, that his love is being questioned, and he wants to affirm, I do love you. And then Jesus tells Peter, feed my lambs. The same question is then repeated to Peter for a second time. Simon, son of John, do you love me? And this time, Jesus doesn't say more than these. He drops that part of the question, but simply, do you love me? And again, the reply is the same from Peter. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Again, John, in writing this, uses the same two words for love that he used in the first question and the reply as well. So those different words. And this time, the commission given to Peter is slightly different. Tend my sheep this time. And tend has perhaps a broader meaning than feed, means to exercise the role of a shepherd. Be a shepherd to my sheep. And sheep used here instead of lambs, but again, perhaps no real significance in that difference as well. And then for the third time, Jesus asks, Simon, son of John, do you love me? But this time, when John records this, the word for love is different, that John has Jesus using the word that Peter used in his reply. So phileo instead of that agapeo word. On being asked the same question for a third time, though, Peter is grieved. It hurt him. Why was Peter upset that Jesus had asked him this the third time? Perhaps it upset him that his love for Jesus was being repeatedly questioned here. Or perhaps the three questions, do you love me, reminded him of the three occasions when he had denied Jesus. I don't know this man. I don't know this man. I don't know this man. And Peter's reply to the third question is more emphatic here. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. So again, Peter is appealing to Jesus' personal knowledge of his condition of heart. That Jesus knows his heart. You know that I love you. You know everything. You know that I love you. And then for a third time, Jesus commissions Peter to care for his flock. Feed my sheep, this time he says. So the scene here really shows to us the restoration of Peter to his position amongst the apostles. 3 times he had denied knowing Jesus around that charcoal fire that was burning in the court of the high priest, where Peter was warming himself. And now there's another charcoal fire burning on this beach where Jesus is serving breakfast. And this opportunity being given to Peter, to him now to affirm 3 times that he loves Jesus. And then 3 times Jesus commissioning him with this care of the flock. Look after my sheep, be a shepherd to my sheep. So whatever mistakes or failures Peter may have made in the past, the other disciples will now see that Peter has been restored. They will see what's gone on here. And that this commission is then followed by prophecy. Jesus says that in the past, when Peter was a young man, he was free to dress himself and to go wherever he wanted to go. But in old age, he will not be able to do those things. That Peter will stretch out his hands and others will dress him and carry him to a place he does not want to go. It sounds just like, what comes upon us as we get older, that we lose our independence, but there's more to it than that here. As John then explains that in these words, Jesus was showing by what death he was to glorify God. And the phrase here, you will stretch out your hands, may perhaps be understood as a reference to crucifixion, as the hands were outstretched upon the cross. That's what will happen to Peter. And there's a tradition that Peter was crucified in Rome, and that he was crucified upside down because he didn't want to be crucified in the same way in which his Lord had been crucified. And the prophecy here is followed by Jesus saying to Peter, follow me. Whatever happens, follow me. And the sense there is of keep on following. You follow me, keep on following me. So it's a call for Peter to steadfastly follow the Lord. Keep going, follow me. Peter's attention is then drawn to the disciple whom Jesus loved, also characterized here as the one who had lain close to the breast at supper and had said, Lord, who is it that is going to betray you? It's referring back to the incident in chapter 13, verses 23 to 25 on that last night. So on seeing John, presuming he's the disciple whom Jesus loved, on seeing John following them, Peter asked, Lord, what about this man? Well, Jesus has just told Peter some prophecy concerning his own future. Now Peter wants to know, well, what's going to happen to this man? And Jesus' reply is, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. Jesus' answer here suggests that what happens to John, what might happen to John, is really none of Peter's business. None of your business what happens to him. The most important thing is that you follow me. And John then deals with a misunderstanding that had arisen in the church over these words of Jesus. In verse 23, he says, the saying spread abroad among the brethren that this disciple was not to die. So that rumor spread around that he would not die. And then he adds here, yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? If I want him to stay here until I come back again, so what? What is that to you? That's simply how it was meant. It was not to be understood that John would remain alive until Jesus came back again. Well, the final couple of verses in the gospel, then verses 24 and 25. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. These are a couple of intriguing verses. It's not clear exactly who is writing these last verses. Is it John himself? Is it someone else writing these? But it asserts the reliability of his testimony. This is the disciple that's referring back to the disciple whom Jesus loved. He is the one who is testifying to these things, and he has written them down. And verse 24 says, and the writer here says, and we know. So who's that referring to? Who's the we there? This seems to be something that someone else has added on the end here. We know that his testimony is true. This is what the disciple whom Jesus loved has written, and we know that his testimony is true. We know that he's telling the truth. And then the comment is added there that that there were many other things that Jesus did, but these haven't been recorded. And if every one of them were written down, again, there's I suppose. So who's the I there? Who's writing this? I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. So if you were to try to write down everything that Jesus did, there would be no space in the world to keep all of those books. And so that's how the gospel ends. It ends sort of rather abruptly, really, with those final couple of verses there. But we've come to the end of this study of John's gospel, and it's a wonderful gospel, really. There's so much in here, and there's a few things that we might reflect upon from this evening. Why did Peter go fishing? Why make that choice there at this time? Why go fishing? And then how did the disciple whom Jesus loved recognize that it was the Lord on the beach there? Why did Jesus ask Peter 3 times, do you love me? And then more generally, what have you learnt about Jesus from our study of the Gospel of John? How has this been of help to you? What are perhaps the standout moments, the highlights for you from the Gospel of John? We'll stop.